Hey y'all. So this should be round two of video notes for you, where our sensation and perception content is concerned. We're actually going to end up wrapping up the sensation part of stuff today by tackling touch, taste, and smell. So you should have a couple of different electronic handouts in front of you as you're going through and filling in all of this info. So let's get started. We're actually going to talk about smell first. So I'm going to move my video out of the way here real fast. So you actually have the ability to detect 10,000 different kinds of substances that can stimulate your sense of smell. So we call them odorants, okay, or odors, which you guys are familiar with. So you have the ability to detect 10,000 of those, which is pretty astronomical if you think about it. That's a lot of different scents. And the funny thing about scent is that odor is really hard to define in words. Like when you smell something, a lot of times what we end up doing is we look at it in the sense of like, that smells good, or oh, that smells bad. You're not sitting there when you get a whiff of somebody's axe, like, oh my God, that's juniper with this, hint of balsam pine. So I mean, it sounds really goofy when you think of it that way, but part of why odors and odorants are so difficult for us to define in terms of words is because of how scent gets processed in the brain. Remember, it goes through your limbic system, and so it gets processed far more at kind of like an emotional level than it ever does in a sense of trying to be able to put words to the experience of that sensation. Um, so the more emotional event is, the more likely we will remember it. And so a lot of times that's why smells have such strong impacts on us. I know I've shared with you guys the story about, old school, Old Spice smell and the connection that I have, and the emotions I feel when I smell that. I immediately think of my dad. When you have a cold, so I know many of you guys know this, we're in allergy season at present. And so, anytime that you get a really stuffed up nose, your ability to actually experience flavor of something gets really thrown off. I'm not going to say taste because taste is the taste buds on your tongue, but flavor is the experience of something that's far more complex than just that. So, if I'm sitting here and I sound like this, and I've got a cold or my allergies are really bad, as funny as that sounds, you're not going to be able to experience flavor of much. You'll get the taste of it. You can have sweetness or saltiness to something, but you're not going to get flavor of strawberry or maple syrup or, chicken. You're not going to get any of those experiences of flavor unless you've got scent along with it. And we'll talk about the significance of that too, what we call sensory interaction in a little while. Now, when we talk about the experience of scent, there's a lot of research that's been done at different points on whether human beings are a lot like animals in the sense that we can release odorants out into the air to signal to the opposite sex our level of attraction. Animals can do it. They have things called pheromones, which truly are chemicals that get sent out to extend interest to the opposite sex for the sake of reproduction. Humans, through research, we know that they don't really have that ability. It hasn't stopped an awful lot of companies from trying to use that science based in animal research and then trying to kind of bring it over into the human structure for things too. So now let's move to taste, which has a little bit more significance to what we're going to be talking about through today. We'll definitely spend a lot more time on taste. In class, I typically do an activity with you guys where we do blind baby food taste testing to give you guys the opportunity to experience some sensory interaction, but also to evaluate the impact of taste itself, not just flavor. But the actual organ of taste is your taste buds that are on your tongue. They're nerves. And so they are responsible for providing you with the receptors' experiences of taste of bitter, sweet, salty, and sour. Now, interestingly enough, I share this with my AP kids. There's research that supports the idea of a fifth taste receptor called umami. It's believed to connect with like a savory taste, and a lot of times that connects in with like meat juice. And when you say it like that, it sounds pretty disgusting. But I mean, think about it. For those that enjoy eating meat, it's not very popular to or desirable to have it super dried out. People like to have a little bit of juice in there with the meat because it makes it more flavorful. So that's actually the fifth taste receptor out there, which is called umami. Now, you have taste buds all over your tongue. There's 10,000 of them actually. And they can regenerate. They get filed down through various different kinds of textures as you eat. I know many of you guys have probably also had experiences where you maybe bit your tongue or, cut it somehow. And so you had one of your taste buds kind of like exposed and it hurt really bad. Um, so you've got all 10,000 of those, and you can taste sweet, salty, sour, bitter all over the tongue, but some of the receptors are more closely concentrated in particular parts of the tongue. So at the very tip, you have sweetness. So right behind that is saltiness. And so that's a lot of times too why you often have a tendency when you eat something sweet to desire something salty afterwards, or vice versa. Then you've got sour along the outliers in the middle of the tongue, and in the very back is bitterness. And this is why when you wake up in the morning and you get real nasty morning breath, they actually recommend that you brush your back of your tongue or just your tongue in general too, because that'll get rid of the bitter taste that you've got when you wake up in the morning. So some food for thought. Now, when you look at taste buds, regular individuals have those 10,000 taste buds on their tongue, but it is possible for you to be something that we would call a non-taster, which is this image down here. They have fewer functioning taste buds, so food is just crazy bland to them. It doesn't have much taste. Okay, so they need to have a lot more flavor to something in order to be able to experience it. There are actually some medications that can cause non-taster status in a person. Normal tasters you'll see in the middle, and then over here you got super tasters. And super tasters are pretty fascinating. I used to do an activity where I would give kids the opportunity to do this right here, where they would do these litmus paper pieces essentially, and they would put them on their tongue, and it would turn their tongue like different colors, and then ultimately it would facilitate them being able to see how many taste buds they had and how compact they were on the tongue, and then the person was able to see if they were a normal taster or a super taster. Super tasters have 6 times the normal amount of taste buds, so they've got 60,000 of those suckers on their tongue. So rather than being a non-taster where stuff is just crazy bland, for the people that are super tasters, it is super intense for them. So something that is just regularly sweet to you or I would be overwhelmingly sweet to them, very sugary. If something had just a minimal amount of salt in it, for a super taster, all they'd be able to taste is salt. Okay, so they would definitely need to have their food be as bland as possible. Whereas non-tasters, because things are so bland to them naturally, they need more spice to what it is that they eat. So you can see here in this image too, this shows you how your nerve endings work on your taste buds, on your tongue. Their technical name is papilla, and so the plural is papillae. And so you can see that you've got your taste core right here, and then that's right there, and then just below it is the actual bud itself, and then these lines right here, these are the nerves that connect into the tongue itself, and they facilitate the sending of that sensory experience up to the brain to get processed in your parietal lobe. Now, when we talk about flavor, it's important to recognize that, I'm going to move myself down here again, move out of the way, well, we're gonna cut off the pancakes. Flavor isn't the same as taste, and that's an important differentiation. Really important, as a matter of fact. Okay, taste is sweetness. Flavor is strawberry, grape, cherry. Okay, so flavor of something is far more than just the taste buds themselves. Smell factors into it, and we talked about that with your nose being plugged up when you've got a cold, or really bad allergies, and so food doesn't taste the same in terms of its flavor. Sight matters too. If you look at something and it looks disgusting, you're probably going to perceive that it tastes, in terms of flavor, really disgusting. I've never been a big fan of cottage cheese. I will readily acknowledge that fact here right now. I think it looks pretty gross. Always have. So I've never had a desire to eat it. I love cheese. I'm crazy about it. I put cheese on pretty much anything I can get my hands on with it. But I will not touch cottage cheese just because of the way that it looks. To me, the texture of it just skeeves me out, and I just can't handle it, so I don't eat it. Temperature matters too. Could you imagine having cold chicken noodle soup where you just pulled it right out of your refrigerator and like all of the grease from the broth is like congealed and it's like solid chunks in there? No, you couldn't. Okay. And all of that leads toward the experience of flavor. I'm sure there are some of you guys that are probably gagging, right? As you're thinking about it. Okay, so we call this whole process of multiple senses working with one another to provide a particular experience sensory interaction. Okay, so flavor is more than just eating something and getting the taste on your tongue. It's multiple senses working together to give you a sense of what that would be like in terms of the experience itself. Now, something else that we often have very robust conversation about in class is the concept of taste aversion. When you pair a really unpleasant experience, usually it's getting sick, with some kind of food that you had eaten pretty recently at that point. And so you've learned then to have a dislike to that item, and you just won't touch it anymore. Okay. So let's say, for example, you eat spaghetti, you get sick. Now you cannot eat spaghetti. You don't even like looking at it. It makes you feel pretty queasy. Okay. Students have shared any number of different scenarios with taste aversion. Excuse me. So I've had kids that have said that they can't do Skyline, they can't do Chipotle, they can't have, what are some of those? Oh, salad. I've actually had quite a few kids say that they can't do salad because they got sick one time after eating it. There's lots of different things that you could have a taste aversion to. It's simply just a matter of what you had in terms of the unpleasant experience and then the dislike that you developed in the aftermath. Whoop, gotta go back. All right, so let's talk skin senses, wrap this stuff up for today. So skin senses are technically called cutaneous senses. Okay, so for example, when you get an IV, it's called subcutaneous fluid. Okay, so sub means under and cutaneous means skin. Okay, so touch is actually multiple semi-independent senses. So by that, what we mean is there's a couple of processes that go on depending on the kind of skin sensation you are experiencing. So, for example, pressure, warmth, cold, and pain. So, pressure, temperature with warmth and cold, and pain, those are all the semi-independent senses. So they work interconnectedly with one another, but they also do their own jobs. For example, pain and warmth, like you feel those at the exact same time sometimes. If you stick your hand in boiling water, for example, that sucker is going to hurt real bad. And so it's not just warmth that's getting processed on the skin, but it's also, or temperature, it's also the pain that goes along with it. Same thing for if you stuck your hand in freezing cold water. You'll experience pain and you'll feel the temperature of the coldness there, okay? So your skin is your largest sense organ. It's actually about 20 square feet for an average adult, all told, which seems kind of creepy. And it also weighs 6 pounds, interestingly enough. So some fun facts there. Now, other facts to keep in mind when it comes to touch, I'm going to move myself out of the way for a little bit, is that the least sensitive part of your body is the middle of the back. And you can try it right now if you're not sitting with a chair that has a back to it. So I'm sitting at my dining room table right now, so you can see I've got a back to my chair. So it's not really easy for me to be able to do it, but I've done it many, many times in class before. You take your fist, doesn't matter. You can do your dominant hand, so I would do my right hand because you'd be able to hit a little bit harder. But you're going to take it smack to the middle of your back, and you're going to hit it as hard as you possibly can, okay? You feel something. It's not like you don't feel anything there. However, the pain you feel is probably going to be fairly dull, all things considered. It'll probably hurt more in your hand than it would in the middle of your back, and that's because extremities are far more likely to be sensitive, or the most sensitive areas. So we're talking hands, lips, face, neck, tongue, fingertips, feet, like all that stuff. That's why your hands and your feet can get cold way more quickly. They're just more sensitive in general. Now, if you were to take that exact same fist, put it to your other hand, and then smack it as hard as you could there, you're going to feel it in both the fist and in the hand that you just hit because those areas are just so sensitive. So feel free to do that for yourself if you're so inclined right now. Something else to keep in mind is that shivering is your body's way of trying to get warmer. It's trying to make you move so that you kind of create more, I believe it's kinesthetic energy. If I'm given the right science terms there. If I'm not, I'm going to apologize. I haven't taken that kind of stuff since I was in high school. But the other thing to keep in mind is that sweating is actually your body's way of trying to cool you down. If you've ever watched professional sports, you probably noticed that they don't wipe away all of the sweat from their face, for example. They really just move it out of the way of their eyes so it doesn't get down into their eyes and irritate them and make it difficult for them to be able to see. Most of them keep it on the majority of their face, and that's because they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. They're letting the sweat do its job to cool you down as a result. So the next time you find yourself sweating an awful lot when you're hitting the summer, don't wipe away all of the sweat from your face. Let it stay there because then it has the ability to do what it needs to do. The most significant thing to discuss when we're talking about touch is the experience of pain. Pain receptors themselves are bare nerve endings, and they send messages to your spine that will then open, multitudes of gates, and we'll talk about this in a little bit, to determine whether pain messages should make their way through to the brain or whether they don't need to be focused on in any way, okay? So the actual physical experience of pain and those nerve endings, they depend on sensory info, whether that be about tissue damage, so you making a cut, for example, on your finger, getting a paper cut, you stubbing your toe, okay? But it also is really important to recognize the emotional context to pain too, because pain can intensify or get lesser if you are in a particular emotional state. So the more unhappy you are, the more intense your pain is going to be. And the more pleasant of a mood you find yourself in, the more that the pain won't bother you at all and it'll feel fairly minimal. And they've done tons and tons and tons of research on this, and this goes all the way back even. The big one I can think of with gate control theory that we're about to talk about in a minute is from the 60s. Okay, so anxiety and fear and the sense of helplessness actually intensifies an experience of a person's pain. And so positive feelings make them feel as if pain is not nearly as prevalent, or they don't even feel it at all. And so that's why you see a lot of times in cancer wards for little children, these efforts to constantly keep their spirits up and to make them feel happy and to feel positivity and laughter. I can talk about my own experiences when I was going through labor, something that is excruciatingly painful. There truly are no words to describe it. And when you are going through your mommy and daddy classes, when they're prepping you for all this stuff, they run you through it and they basically tell your partner, whoever they happen to be, that their sole job is to make you happy and keep you content. Because a first-time mom, their average labor experience is 14 hours. And that's not with active labor. And then on average, there's 2 hours in addition to that to pushing. And so moms are just spent by the time they're getting to those points. And a lot of first-time moms, their babies end up staying in there for a lot longer than full term. Many of them can go for 41 weeks. I was lucky. My daughter came at 38 and my son came at 37. So like rock on that one. But nevertheless, a lot of times moms end up being induced then, and it can take a very, very, very long period of time. They can start to feel very overwhelmed and scared, and especially if you're a first-time parent, you don't know what to expect. And so what they tell that partner constantly is that it is their job to make sure that the mom is as content as she possibly can be, as happy as she can possibly be, so that way the experience of the labor pains isn't as intense as it could be if she was more scared. Something that is really fascinating to kids when I talk about the concept of pain is the inability to experience it at all. Believe it or not, it's not just superheroes that have that capacity. It can be something that is biologically presented in human beings. So you can be born with something called congenital insensitivity to pain, or chronic insensitivity to pain. It's CIP. It's very, 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 very rare, but it does happen. Kids like, it should say Ashland Blocker, excuse me, feels no pain. Okay, and so you're actually going to get a chance to watch a video on this little girl, and what it was like to be her parents and watch her grow up, and all of the different things they had to do for her, because she feels no pain. She feels nothing. Okay, so if she breaks a limb, has no idea. She feels no extreme heat or cold either, so she could walk out in negative 40-degree wind chill with no clothes on, and she'd feel nothing. There'd be no discomfort, no pain. It sounds very superhero-ish, and it sounds really cool initially when I share this with kids, but the sad reality is many with CIP end up dying by early adulthood because their joints fail from excessive strain and ultimately the effects of unchecked infections and injuries, because their body can't tell them when something's wrong. For you or I, when we get sick, we have fevers. Our body gives us chills and aches and pains, right? And so she doesn't have that ability. Ashlyn doesn't. And so for her family to be able to know what's going on for her it's just a constant question over and over and over again, because they just don't know if she's got problems internally or not. Because kids have always asked me, well, how do they not know if she doesn't have a fever? Like, it'd be pretty obvious. Well, here's the thing. I don't know about you guys, but when I found myself wanting to stay home from school and I'd be like, oh gosh, Mom, I don't feel good. First thing she'd do is she'd take her hand and she'd put the back of it to my head and she'd measure whether I had a fever going on and whether I felt warm. Well, if kids like Ashland Blocker don't have that ability, Mom can't tell that there's a fever. So Mom doesn't know if she's got the flu or a cold or any other kind of infection. Okay, so it's a pretty interesting state of circumstances. There, like I told you earlier, there is a video that you're going to have a chance to watch if you find this particularly interesting or you want to learn more about it. So one of the last academic parts of this lecture is, I can't really move myself out of the way here. Let's just move it. Let's just put it back up here. Okay. So pain can increase or decrease based off of expectations. Okay. And we know this, we've talked about it in class any number of times. For example, you can, as soon as you hit your funny bone, you automatically know, like, oh man, this is going to hurt. And then there's going to be a delay. And then, hey, there it is, it hurts. Okay. And so there's a variety of different things that can increase an injury and the pain that you feel. We, through research, believe that there is something in the spine, some kind of gate, okay, that allows some pain messages to get sent, but some to also be stopped. And so depending on the message that the spine is receiving, it's then going to influence what pain messages you get and how you feel them. So that's ultimately why we think that rubbing the elbow after you smack your funny bone is able to make the pain stop. Because what happens with all that stimulation, so if I got my elbow here and I'm sitting here and I'm rubbing it, there's so many sensory signals being sent that essentially what happens is some of the messages with regard to the pressure and the touch part make it through the spine's gate, but some of the other messages, like the pain itself, gets shut down, and the brain basically doesn't get that message any longer as a result. Okay, so you can inhibit pain messages in the spine by closing that gate, okay? And it's endorphins. We've already talked about endorphins. Remember Kevin Ware and the video that we talked about with him. Endorphins are going to be what helps to close that gate when you experience pain through gate control theory. It's also important to recognize that we believe that gate control explains one of the coolest phenomenons that's out there, in all honesty, called phantom pain. Okay? This is when a person who no longer has a limb can still experience pain in that body part. Yeah, so let me say this again. Let's say you are somebody who has survived a war. Okay, you lose your leg from the knee down. It is possible for the person to still experience pain in that lower part of their leg, in their calf, even though that calf no longer exists or is connected to them. And so the question becomes, why? How is that possible when there are no longer any nerve endings there that can possibly send this stuff? And so not only do we feel that this connects to gate control theory, we also think that there is basically a connection to the concept of muscle memory. And I know many of you guys are familiar with that. Basically what happens is when that part of the body that still is present on the limb gets activated, okay? So if, for example, you are amputated from the knee down, anytime that the skin from right around the knee gets activated in any way, whether it's through movement of the muscles there or anything along those lines, it can send neurons to the brain via those old networks and generate pain even though it's not there. So it's basically relying a lot on the limbic system, the memory of that limb existing in the first place. And so phantom pain could be due to the fact that the surrounding tissue, when it gets moved, triggers connected areas of neural networks in the brain, which is pretty cool. It's important to recognize that phantom pain, you're going to get to see how it is that they treat phantom pain in amputees. They use mirrors. And so you'll get to watch that video in a little bit. But it's important to recognize, too, that there is also a video that you're going to get a chance to watch where you don't have to have an amputation. They've done numerous means of research to show the significance of phantom pain. For example, anytime you watch videos that involve people doing stunts where they just completely wipe out, or they flop on the floor, or they just have some kind of like awful injury. Think back again to Kevin Ware. And so many of you guys, when you watched his injury, were just like, and you just cringed in response to that. Well, that was phantom pain. You weren't actually going through the experience that Kevin Ware did, but you put yourself in his position, and the body and the brain felt as if you could feel what that man would have gone through in that moment. And so you'll get a chance to be able to watch that video too. So, thus endeth the sensation portion of our video notes. Hopefully you find the videos that you get to watch on all of this stuff after the fact pretty interesting. But as always, let me know if you got any questions, because I'm more than happy to help, and I will talk to you soon.